We've got 7 right now, we can start.
I got 1:30 now, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I'm called the meeting to order for APCD for today is the February the 11th. A roll call.
Board Member Bennett.
Here.
Board Member Blatz.
Here.
Board Member Edmonds.
Here.
Board Member Huber.
Here.
Board Member Long.
Here.
Board Member Parks. Board Member Pollock.
Here.
Board Member Ramirez. Board Member Rollins.
Here.
Chair Zaragoza.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. And please follow me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is item number 4. It's the minutes of the meeting of PCD Board for Tuesday, Jan 14.
I'll motion to approve.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's approved. Number 5 is a review of the agenda and consider and approve by majority vote. Any minor revisions to the board items and attachments and any items added, removed, / continue from the Air Pollution Control Board. Any concerns from board members?
I have.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Board Member Zaragoza. Item number 9, receive and file a status report on Ventura County air quality trends. A revised PowerPoint presentation has been submitted. Item 10, receive and file a status report on Ventura County air quality trends, A PowerPoint has been submitted. That is all.
Okay, that's been noted. Okay, any concerns or any reviews from board members? A motion?
Motion approved.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we're good. Public comments, do we have any public members that might want to share? None at all? Okay, good. Board comments? No board comments? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, item the regular agenda item. This is approve to appoint 2 Ventura County Air Pollution Control Board APCD members to the APC Standing Committee and approve to appoint the APCB member to the South Coast Basin Wide Air Pollution Control District. I would like to nominate for the Standing Committee myself, of course, Mr. Pollock, Mr. Blatz, and Mr. Huber.
Second.
Yep, so you motioned and seconded?
Second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, JZ, Pollock, Blatz, and Huber.
Congratulations.
And also now for APCD board members for the South Coast Basin, Coastal Basin, I'd like to nominate Lynn Edmonds.
I'll second
Again?
that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I learned a lot, so.
Okay. And our next item is receive and file the status report on the Ventura County Air Pollution Control quality trends. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Good afternoon. For the record, Laki Tosopoulos, Air Pollution Control Officer with the district. So we just left the ozone season behind us, and we are at the tail end of the particulate season, so I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to walk you through the state of our air quality. Let's see. So, and before I dive into the statistics, I want to give you, to share with you a few words about our monitoring system. We have 5 monitoring stations. Essentially, we subdivided our district into 6 regions, and we have 5 monitoring stations that are located in the populated area, inhabited area, the lower half of the county. We don't do much monitoring on the upper half of the county. And it's these monitoring stations, and you can see some photos over here, the interior and exterior of those container boxes. They're filled with instruments, automated instruments that Our monitoring staff do visit on a daily basis to monitor equipment and ensure that things are operating properly. And we've been operating these stations for, oh gosh, I don't know, for several decades now, for almost 4 decades. We monitor 2 of the criteria pollutants for which the feds have established standards for, the ozone and particulate matters. We are in compliance. We are in attainment with the particulate standards, but we are in non-attainment with respect to the ozone standard. So I'm going to start with the ozone standard and providing you with some statistics. But before we do that, let me share with you some historical perspective. When EPA comes up with a standard, they basically look at the scientific evidence and they try to draw the line where they cannot find any association between ambient air quality, ambient ozone concentrations, and adverse health effects. And if they can find this line, that's where they're going to draw the line, and that becomes our standard. And every 5 to 10 years, they'll revisit the standard, they'll review the latest and greatest scientific evidence, and if there is new evidence that shows that there are health effects, health impacts, adverse health impacts associated with lower ambient concentrations, then what they do is they'll lower the standard accordingly with some margin of safety. And sometimes the form of the standard will change. So when we first started monitoring ozone air quality, the first standard was 1 hour ozone standard. And luckily, we have met that standard. And later on, and in the late 90s, in 97 to be precise, EPA decided to switch from the 1 hour standard to an 8 hour standard to be more protective over a longer period of time. And they established the standard at 80 parts per billion. It's a concentration standard. So if you look at the 1997, we had approximately 45 days of the year where we were exceeding the standard. Luckily, now we are in attainment of the standard. We have met it. But that's how we were when we started. So as I mentioned earlier, 10 years went by, and in 2008, EPA lowered that standard from 80 parts per billion to 75 parts per billion. And just to give you a historical comparison, back in the late 90s, we were exceeding that standard by more than 80 days. And by the way, those days were during the high ozone season, which is the summertime. So a good chunk of our summer, we were exceeding those standards. You fast forward 2 decades, in 2019, we came very close to attaining the standard. Actually, the end of this year, 2020, we are anticipating we are going to meet the standard if the weather cooperates with us and we don't have an ultra high.
That had to do with the weather?
Yes, so we are in direct communication with the Almighty out there
Okay.
to help us out with this. So we have very good chance of meeting that standard. And let's fast forward to 2015. EPA went yet through another reduction, lowering of the standard from 75 to 70 ppb. By the way, our air quality management plan that we have developed and that you adopted and we are implementing right now is with respect to the 75 parts per million standard, the middle bar. We have not developed yet the air quality management plan for the 70 parts per billion standard. We'll be coming to your board probably towards the tail end of this year and perhaps early next year with that. But just again, for comparative purposes, back in the late 90s, we were exceeding that standard, that newest standard, by 115 days during the year. This past year, this past season was our cleanest in the record. We had only 7 exceedances. So we are not quite there yet, but we are making tremendous progress, more than 93, 94% reduction from where we were in the late 90s. And our attainment date for this new standard is 2026. So we have quite a few years, and based on this trend, we are reasonably optimistic if all parties concerned do their fair share, local, state, and federal, and again, if the weather cooperates, we should be able to meet our targets. So it's a pretty impressive reduction, improvement in air quality. And the record is even more impressive if you consider that our population has been increasing during the same time frame. We went down from 720,000 inhabitants to residents to 850 in 2019, so more than 15%.
Supervisor Bennett? We got a
Please,
question.
yes.
Yeah, we had a couple questions.
Bennett and then Lon.
What caused the spike up in 2003? Do we know?
The year-to-year variation is not all that unusual. It's predominantly meteorology. You know, if we have very dry season, if we don't have winds of sufficient strength to disperse, you know, the air quality, we end up, you know, with these unusual circumstances. And it's not germane just to Ventura County. Every district up and down the state sees similar fluctuations. So don't look at the zigzags, as they say, you know, in the stock market from year to year. Look at the long-term trend, which is extremely encouraging.
Supervisor Long?
So speaking of trends, and our terrain for Ventura County is not the same. And so my understanding is that in the Simi Valley area, where they have that valley, we have the issue where we're not hitting the 70 all the time.
Correct.
And so I had discussions with your predecessor because you know where the winds come from.
Yes.
And so it's working with also the other counties
Absolutely.
in regards to their air pollution as well that's coming through and bringing it in.
Yes.
Similar as what we deal with water and so forth.
Absolutely.
So I'm just encouraging that we do work with our counties also on that because I know we're really, really close.
Yes, we are very close, and you are absolutely correct. When you look at the 7 days of exceedance,
Yeah.
they were predominantly on Simi Valley. Some of them were at the neighboring station as well. But Simi also happens to be at a transport corridor, so emissions are heavily influenced by transport-related emissions, heavy-duty trucks and stuff, you know, they go through. But you are absolutely correct. It's also been influenced by the much worse air quality in our neighboring districts to the south coast.
Well,
So when the wind direction changes,
Right.
some of that air mass that stays above South Coast will spill over to across the border to us, to Simi Valley, and that will contribute.
Well, and I'm not saying we stop what we're doing because we're amazing. What I'm saying is just that there's so many different ways to go at it. We need
Yes.
to consistently do all of those.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm saying.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. So the population is increasing. We have more people residing in the county. We have more vehicles that we are driving in our county, and we are driving them even longer distances. And what we are showing in this slide with the blue curve going up is the VMT, the vehicle miles traveled. So that is going up also exponentially. So despite those, I'll say, you know, negative activities, we are still managing to improve air quality. And again, we are reasonably optimistic. As the technology keeps improving, we are going to continue making the progress that we need to make. So this was in terms of number of days by which we are exceeding the standard. We are also monitoring exposure. In other words, what is the maximum, the worst case concentration that our lungs see? And that's what we are plotting over here on the left-hand side. Back in the late 90s, in 97, the maximum concentrations that our lungs would see would be at 115 parts per billion. Now we are at slightly over than 75 parts per billion. So we have made close to, 40% plus improvement on those worst-case scenarios as well. So with respect to the PM 2.5, there are two standards. There's a 24-hour average standard and an annual average standard, a longer standard. And the good news is we are in attainment with both of these standards, but we still continue to monitor this. It's very important how well we do with the particulate standard, it's because it's one of those rare instances when EPA established the standard, they were not able to identify the bright line below which there are no health effects associated with ambient concentrations. So even though we are meeting the standard, it behooves us to continue making progress because we know that there are air quality impacts even at those lower concentrations. So the first 24 standard that EPA established was at 65 micrograms per cubic meter, and later on in 2006, they lowered it to 35. We are doing extremely well. Back in the early 2000s, we were exceeding the standard by 5 to 8 days. But by the tail end of the 2000s, in 2009, 10, we met the standard. The only exception, is in 2017 and 2018. Do you see that spike?
What caused it, Pete? What caused it?
What caused that spike? It was the Thomas Fire in 2018, and it was in 2017. And the Woolsey Fire in 2018.
How quick I forget.
And this year, we had some smaller brush fires, I should say, but we managed to stay below the standard, so we did not have any exceedance thus far. Now, EPA conventions, because these are...
Got a question?
Shouldn't it be higher with we had the Thomas Fire in 2017, the Woolsey and Hill Fire in 2018, and we had the Easy and Maria Fire in 2019. So
Right.
data for the 19 seems like it should be a little bit higher,
It's a
maybe
major
not.
increase.
For whatever reason.
For whatever
managed
reason,
to
it wasn't
stay
below this-
below. And
Wow.
those instruments don't lie. They are so sensitive. They would have picked it up
that's-
just like that.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it is. So with respect to the 2017 and 2018, even though the spike looks pretty horrible, because it's the so-called, it's an exceptional event, EPA developed a policy that allows us to exclude from our statistical information that we forward to EPA those two data points. We left them in, and I'll come back to you, Supervisor. We left them in just for the purpose of this presentation for you to get a feel, a sense of how important those events are and how drastically they can change the overall air quality trend. And regardless whether we are allowed or not to include those into our statistical information that we are transmitting to EPA, our lungs do see those impacts.
So in 19, we were below the 2.5
Yes, we were.
because of the good weather and rain and so.
We are still in attainment, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
And with respect to the annual average, the first standard established was at 15 micrograms, and later on, it was reduced to 12 micrograms per cubic meter, indicated with the horizontal blue line. And when we started monitoring in the early 2000s, we were roughly at 15 micrograms per cubic meter, but today, in 2019, we are at 7.5 micrograms, which is extremely, extremely impressive, especially if we'll compare ourselves with our neighbors to the south, with South Coast.
Councilmember
Almost
Rollins,
double
yeah.
of ours.
Rollins? Mhm.
I was just looking back at the map, and
Yes.
it seems like it's like a wide swath.
Right.
And how do they measure it? Because like it looked like everything from Simi Valley to the coast.
Right.
There's got to be quite a bit difference.
Of course, yes.
And so how did they do that?
Where you position the monitoring station is very critical because they have to be strategically positioned so that the air quality information that is being compiled by each monitoring station does reflect the air quality exposure of the broader population. So we try to install those and position those where people live, basically. And to the extent there are no physical barriers such as mountain ranges, we are able to keep those monitoring stations to the appropriate number. So we've got 5 stations basically, and given the state of air quality where we are, it's an adequate number, size of monitors and we'll probably continue operating those for the foreseeable future.
So within that swath of areas that seem to go like this, where do they put the station? I mean, do they put it like kind of in inland, on the coast? How do-
Both. We have a station in Simi Valley, we have a station in Ojai, we have a station in Del Rio, and we have where's our fourth station? In Piru. So the Piru and Simi Valley, with respect to ozone, are the two stations that we are seeing the higher readings. And as I mentioned, Simi was to a large extent being impacted by the transport. So is Piru because of 118 closer by. So we do have stations closer to the coastal plains as well, even though our air quality is a lot better in the coastal regions than the inland regions. So I hope I'm answering your question.
Okay, thank you.
So where we finished, or we are just about to finish, to end 2019, we are at a very good spot, and we hope that we'll continue making progress. And as I said, 2017 and 2018 were two very unusual circumstances.
you can really see that.
Fires. Not only we see those spikes in our monitors, but we also rely on the satellite imagery, and you
That's
can
unbelievable.
see the plumes, how they evolve and how they are being transported. And I can't remember who the board member was at our last meeting. The question was asked, well, how about pollution from Asia, from China,
That's
and
right.
these other countries? Do we monitor, and how do we know whether we are being impacted or not? Well, we do rely on satellite imagery. So if there is a
That's very telling,
event
Mike.
like big fires, we'll see it, through our satellite imagery. And not to mention our monitors are so sensitive, they'll be able to see those spikes, and we'll be able to identify where the impact is coming from. So based on these trends, and we have a very good control strategy, so long as we stick to that strategy and we do our part, the state does its part, and the feds do their part, we are reasonably optimistic that we are going to hit our targets and our skies will continue getting cleaner. So there is a lot of work that goes behind compiling that information, sanitizing the information, processing that information, and issuing all the smog advisories that we issue and all the forecasting. And the unsung heroes doing this work is, they're not here, but I put their pictures on the slide.
That's the whole team.
With Natasha Kramer, Supervising Air Quality Instrument Specialist, Phil Moyal, Air Quality Specialist, Laura Hodgins, our very own air quality meteorologist, Andy Brown, our air quality instrument technician, and the latest addition to the family just a few months ago, Sam Mitchie. And the person who makes this magic happen is Mr. Mallory Ham, who is managing the team for quite a few years. And he is here with us. Mallory, do you mind, if you...
Thank you.
So, and that concludes my presentation. We intend to be bringing this sort of presentation to you at least once a year so that you're up to speed where we are. And if we are not progressing as well as we would help to progress, we'll be bringing those issues and share those with you.
And thank you for the presentation, and the air's getting cleaner, and that's what we're looking for. Any additional questions, Officer Lang?
I was just going to make one comment real quickly. Back to Mr. Rollins' comment, the air quality devices in the Ojai Valley are tucked as far up northeast as they pretty much can in the valley. There's no cheating. We get the air quality from the worst part of the valley. These statistics are not cherry-picked. In fact, I've always wondered we might be a little more compliant if that was a little closer to the center of town. But with all the air being trapped in the valley, it's important. So I appreciate that. I know I've had this discussion with you before, but it is meticulous on how they lay out where these particular particular instruments go.
Absolutely. And the calibration, the daily routine that we go through to ensure that they're running on tip-top shape, is critically important. There are very strict guidelines how we are supposed to be operating these instruments. And these are EPA published guidelines and state published guidelines. And we do get audited, quite frequently. And we pass, those audits with flying colors, So, yeah, thank you very much.
The question I have is, how about the ships out in the
The
Channel
ships
Islands? Has that helped us?
traversing
Right.
our water lines, they do contribute quite a bit to the problems. Those big ships there, the container ships that we are talking about, I'm not exaggerating, but in any given day, they'll pollute as much as our big smokestack power plants will put out.
Okay.
So we do have a program, a voluntary participation program, where we issue, where we offer financial incentives
That's
for
right.
folks who drop down their speeds, because dropping down the speed, reduces their emissions. And I don't want to steal the thunder from the next speaker, but he's going to walk you through some of those.
We're working with Santa Barbara.
Yes, we do. We work with Santa Barbara and the Bay Area, and we'll talk a little more about
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
So certainly staying true to our air quality management plan and air quality control strategy will probably carry us through the attainment. We are going to be bringing some additional rules to make sure our stationary sources do their fair share later on this year, but it's critically important that the state and the feds do their fair share, because most of the air pollution problem here in this area is transport-related, mobile source related, so we can't do it alone. We cannot pile it on
Absolutely.
our stationary sources' shoulder. And another critical component, solution to our dilemma here is the pass-through incentive programs that we have. And the next item in the agenda will provide you with a summary of those programs so that you know where we are, and it's a very critical component.
Thank you so much. Do we need a motion for this?
No, we don't.
Okay,
don't-
just a receive and
just a
file.
receive and file.
Okay. Our next item is to receive and file the status report of the air quality incentive programs. Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Zaragoza, members of the board. My name is Tyler Harris. I'm a supervising air quality engineer with the district.
Good afternoon.
So I have been running the, recently promoted to supervisor, and so I supervise the staff that operates the incentive programs. And we have several different programs, incentives to reduce air pollution in the county. The pass-through grants that Dr. Desopoulos mentioned are monies from the state that they provide us, and then we administer the programs to distribute the money in various projects to reduce air pollution. Voluntary accelerated vehicle retirement is also considered the old car buyback program. We provide incentive to take off the oldest and most polluting vehicles off the road. The lower emission school bus program is it's a legacy program. We used to provide money to retrofit or repower or replace the worst school buses. Now it's kind of a maintenance level program there. The Clean Air Fund is it's a local program, so that's just local money that we have from an endowment we use for various projects that are recommended by the Clean Air Fund Advisory Committee. And then Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies is the vessel speed reduction program for the ships out in the channel. So we'll start with the pass-through grants. Carl Moyer Memorial Air Quality Standards Program. We've been administering this for 22 years. We've spent $44 million in incentives here in the county, and that's probably added with the cost share of the recipients, at least $60 million spent in the county to reduce air pollution.
What's the determination of how much of the state Carl Moyer funds we get versus how is it by population?
It's based on, there's a number of criteria they use. It's population, the air quality attainment status, and I think that's Yeah, there may be another. Yeah, those are the main two issues that they use. And so because we are a serious non-attainment area here in Ventura County, and we have, just less than 1 million, we were getting about 1.3, 1.4 million, and it's up to about 1.6 or 1.8 million a year from the state for the Carl Moyer.
Over the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's gone up just in the recent years, but yeah, it was stable at about a little less than 1.5 million for many years. So the genius that made this acronym, the Funding Agricultural Replacement Measures for Emission Reductions, or the FARMER program, that's just a couple years old. It's targeted towards agricultural equipment, and because we are a heavily agriculture-based economy, and we have a lot of agriculture in the county, we get about $1 million a year, already have about $1 million a year for that program. Community Area Protection Program is targeted towards the disadvantaged communities and low-income communities, and that's also a newer program.
Go get a question here, Edmonds.
For the farmer program, several of my friends who are farmers have mentioned they like the equipment they have. They don't want new ones, but it needs to be upgraded. Is there any way to provide upgrading systems so they're not polluting as much?
Most of the farm equipment is, because of the way it is manufactured, you can't put a new engine in it. Because the tractors, the wheels and the whole system is basically just bolted to the engine. So it's really difficult. We don't generally do what they call repowers. We don't put new engines in farm equipment. We just have to replace it.
So you have to replace the whole unit then?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
With some of the older, like the construction equipment, like the big scrapers and loaders and stuff like that, you can put new engines in those, but just the farm equipment, the way it's made, it just doesn't work.
Thank you.
So this is a typical Carl Moyer or farmer program project where we have an old tractor that's probably a late 90s Landini tractor, 100 horsepower, and then we give them about 70% of the cost. They cover the rest, and they end up with a brand new, say that's a Kubota 100 horsepower tractor that does the exact same job. In this case, it was a little bit of a unique situation. We had that old Caterpillar D5 it's got a 100 horsepower engine in it, but it weighs so much. It's like 6 tons or 7 tons, and it just pulls anything you want. It goes really slow, but you got that 100 horsepower engine, can do whatever you want with it. So in order to replace that, we had to come up with a different way, because usually it's based on horsepower. You can only replace the same horsepower engine with another tractor with the same horsepower. But this is a 320 horsepower tractor, and you need that much power in the modern equipment to have the large enough tractor to the weight, because you got to get your ground preparation equipment in the ground and turn the ground and that sort of thing. Oh, and with this kind of thing, we get about 97% reduction. So that big green tractor, the John Deere, only puts out 3% of the emissions as that old Caterpillar. So one of the things in this program, the old equipment has to be destroyed, so can never be used again. So in this case, they put the holes in the transmission, holes in the engine block, so that'll never work again. And then this is how we usually do it. It's take it to the scrapyard, and that's that same old Landini in that first picture. And this way, we know that it'll never be used again. Pull the engine right out of there. So we also do fishing vessels. We used to do the ferries and the excursion boats, but they're regulated now, so we can't send them money to help them anymore. They're on their own. But the fishing vessels are not regulated, so we'll take the old, 2-stroke diesel engine and replace it with a nice brand new Tier 3, and we get it again about 90% emission reductions for these projects. Just last year, we started expanding our program into infrastructure, so we can now do electric vehicle charging stations, or in this case, equipment to power an electric crane at the port. So that little crane there it's diesel or electric, and if you put it in the right spot, you can plug it into the grid power. the old car buyback program, so we have about $1,000 per vehicle. 85 vehicles retired in 2019. The lower emission school bus program is now, we use the money to replace the compressed natural gas tanks because they only have a 15-year life. And so the bus is still good, but we want to let them keep using it, so we help them with the new tanks.
Quick question on the school buses. I know a lot of the school buses have gone to green diesel. So would those buses not qualify for this program because they're already a step cleaner than regular diesel?
No, we can still use the regular Carl Moyer program funds to replace the school buses with, say, an electric bus or a natural gas bus.
Okay.
So the Clean Air Fund is it's local money from an endowment, a contribution by 3M Corporation a couple, 15, 20 years ago. We use the interest, and so recently we've been using it to replace or put in electric vehicle infrastructure. So we have 13 charging stations in Thousand Oaks and a couple in Ventura, I think this last year.
And we had one over at the harbor installed too. That worked out pretty good.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, finally, the Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies, as Dr. Salpos mentioned before, it's a partnership with Santa Barbara County APCD, Bay Area, several national marine sanctuaries. We have the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, a private family foundation that contributes money as well for the incentives, and then the Environmental Defense Center and National Marine Sanctuary Foundation.
And the reduction, what is it, knots? I think that's reduced by so many knots. Am I saying
Yes.
it correctly? Yeah.
Yep, so that, we have the images from the National Marine Sanctuary show that why they are involved, because they want to protect the whales. The whales don't even realize there's a danger out there because they are the biggest thing as far as they know. They don't expect something that's that much bigger than them to come barreling by and run them over. So there's scientific research has shown that the ship's average speed is about 15 knots through the channel. And they have shown that if they reduce that speed to 10 knots or less, there's a lower chance of striking a whale, and there's a lower chance that the whale will die if it gets hit. So that's why we set our goal at 10 knots for the ships. And then if you can see, our interest is that plume of smoke at the top of that ship. That's why we are involved. And that comes from this, which is a gigantic propulsion engine from a ship of that size. And if you look up in the upper right corner, you can see there's 4 or 5 guys standing right there. They're standing on the engine because it's just that big.
That is huge.
So that puts out a lot of pollution. And so the program we had going last year wrapped up in November. We have our award ceremony scheduled for April 3rd, 2020. We have 15 shipping companies and 13 will actually receive financial incentives. 374 vessels that traverse our waters and 3,061 transits. So that's how much, and that's also considers the Bay Area, but that's how much traffic there is in this, and that's why there's such a large portion of the emissions inventory is from these ships.
Right.
So they traveled almost 100,000 miles at 10 knots or less because of our program. And 2019 emissions results, we don't have that available. It's a very long and complex process to check each ship, what kind of engine it has and all that kind of stuff to determine what the emission reductions are. But in 2018, it was about 300 tons of NOx in in that case, it was from July through November. This time it was May through November. We had about 50% increase, or almost double the distance traveled at less than 10 knots this year, or last year. So we're saying at least 500 tons of NOx reduced because
That's great. Yeah.
it's incredible.
I just had a question, like, did they do any stats as to how many whales do get hit?
That's extremely difficult to document because most of the time when a whale is hit, it sinks. You never know.
Yeah, we've been trying to find that out for a while.
The ships are so big that they don't even notice when they hit a whale, even though the whale is the largest creature to ever live on Earth. Just don't even know. And every once in a while, one will pull into port with a whale draped over its bow, and that's usually the only time we know. Sometimes when a whale washes up on the shore, it will have trauma that's indicative of a ship strike, and then we can get that information there too.
From a biological, do the whales, you say the whales don't see it coming, or?
Yeah, they didn't evolve an evasion strategy because they are the biggest thing out there. So they don't even know that they have to get out of the way. They expect to be everything get out of their way, right? Because they're the biggest thing around. So, so the final results, with the pass-through grants, we replaced 45 pieces of agricultural equipment, repowered 2 boats. They each had 3 engines, two propulsion and an auxiliary, and then two electric infrastructure projects. 85 vehicles in the old car buyback. Just one bus this year, but it just depends when the cycle comes around. We may have to fix quite a few of the buses. Help.
And the old cars, do they have to be a certain age?
97 or older.
97?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And then Clean Air Fund, we had 13 charging stations and 15, almost 1,600 reduced transits. So 34 tons a year of ozone precursors from everything but the whale, the shipping, because we can't, those aren't permanent reductions. That's the big problem with that program, is we have to put in, say, $200,000 a year, but if we don't do it again next year, we don't contribute that much again next year, the ships will speed up and we won't have that impact again.
That's good information.
I can share with you, we have done some calculations to quantify the benefit. And if I'm not mistaken, you were sharing with me that, Tyler, that just this past year alone, that emission reduction benefit was 500 tons.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge number. It's an estimate, and you can take it from grain of
It's a
salt.
measurement, yeah.
It's a huge number.
Yeah.
Very cost-effective reduction.
Very good. Any question, you still, there we go, questions.
One other thing I wanted to mention that I didn't do this all myself. Miles Bergeson here and Danny McQuillan, they did the grunt work to make all this stuff happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Edmondson?
In the write-up you had, you indicated that this went before the government, the legislature, for a bill? Is that it?
Yes.
And it was not passed. What do you think the chances that it would become a statewide?
It's still an active bill, so it's now a 2-year bill. It's still in the it's passed through the Senate. It's in the House Assembly Appropriations Committee. So that's what it got. It was part of a very large bill with lots of money attached to it, and that was what held it up last year, was the
So it
appropriations.
has been separated from that, it's now.
No, it's still part of there. So if it doesn't come through, the money that we've used in the last couple of years was actually from the state in a supplemental environmental program, basically award that we received from a violation state settlement for Kraft Heinz Foods that had too much VOC in their consumer products. They paid a penalty. We got some of the money, and that's what we used to make this program work.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Any questions?
one
Okay, Ms. Blatz.
What percentage of the total amount of pass-through and other incentives that were up here is the total that we could expand to? In other words, does this represent 100% of what we could hand out, or is this 50%, or how much further can we go under where we currently are?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had, this last year, I believe, the applications that we received for grant funding that were actually approvable were about $8 million-ish, and we had 5.5 to give away. So we're way oversubscribed.
Okay, thank you.
And we see this year after year. So they are extremely popular program. We love them. Our regulator community loves them because it's one of those programs where we can work side by side with them, because we are subsidizing the purchase, to a great extent, the purchase of those newer engines. And that's why we feel this particular program is very critical, a cornerstone of our attainment strategy. So that's the good news. And we do a very good job in spending the money. I mean, every single penny, investable penny, gets
That's right.
invested on something that produces an air quality benefit. It's one of the best governmental programs, that you can imagine.
It's an excellent program.
Excellent program. The bad news is we have a lot of competition from other interests, not just air, but water interests. We are hearing from the latest budget that the draft budget that the governor released, some of this funding is going to be bifurcated into the water interests. So we may be losing some of the dollars that are coming our way. But we intend to fight for every single penny and go back to the governor's office and and legislature and trying to persuade them to up these monies because these are really good investments.
Yeah, very, very rarely do I think most of us get to comment about creativity in this business. But the blue skies, saving the whales, saving the blue skies, blue whales. Is that what I say right? That is, I heard. I've known about this program for a while. I tell everybody. I just think it's one of those really cool endeavors. And for the Ojai Valley, it makes a big difference because a lot of our pollution comes from offshore and gets sucked up into the valley. And I know this is one of the few things that's worked as far. I just appreciate the creativity of it. I hope we can expand it some more. And it's really amazing that some of the shippers are signing on too. It shows that they do take some of the responsibility at least a little bit seriously.
And let me share something with you. That's a really important program. I was the chair of APCD. I can't remember how many years ago, but Villegas and I went.
2015, I think.
We went to Washington D.C. and we got an award, because of that. And Santa Barbara was there with us. So very good.
Well deserved. Thank you, Lackey, and thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so that's the end. Thank you. And we are going to adjourn this meeting, and we have the standing committee is going to meet here over at the Channel Islands Conference Room right here on the third floor. Thank you so much. We're adjourned.